Today is Psalm 11. And when I read the Psalms, what I'm looking to experience is the voice of the Psalter. When I read the Psalms, I want to try and understand and relate to how these words could be words. In what way am I drawn to these words? That's one piece. The second piece is I'm able, in preparing to share with you, to use other writers and resources and time to read very closely and become aware of the artistic weave of the Psalter. And today we have a short psalm, Psalm 11. It's only 7 verses, and that will allow me to spend a little bit more time with you, pointing out how this poem is artistic in terms of the verbs chosen. I'm going to read it through once in English, just so that you can absorb the psalm. And then we'll go back and I will begin with what's the key message of the psalm and how are the words chosen illustrative of that. So first, just to put out the psalm. For the conductor, for David, in Adonai I sheltered. How could you, and the you here is plural, how could you say to my soul, fly off to the hills like a bird? For behold, the wicked bend back the bow. They fix the arrow to the bowstring to shoot from the shadows at the upright of heart. For the foundations are destroyed. What can the righteous person do? Adonai is in the holy palace. Adonai's throne is in heaven. Eyes behold, pupils probing humanity. Adonai probes the righteous, but the wicked lover of violence, such a soul is hated. Upon the wicked coals will rain, fire and brimstone and burning wind shall be the portion of their cup. For righteous is Adonai, loving righteousness. The upright shall behold the divine countenance. So this psalm is Le David. It doesn't say, as the Psalms have said until now, Mizmor Le David, a song for David. This is just for David. And I'll point out that about half the Psalms are written with an ascription for David or linking it to David, about half of them. And it's more true in the beginning of the Psalms than toward the end. Toward the end, we have words like hallelujah that appear. Here, not yet. Here, a Psalm of David. So a pause to say a word about David. David was the monarch for 40 years, roughly 1,000 before the Common Era to 96 before the till 961 before the Common Era. In his life, he had struggle. His great achievement is he was the first king of Israel to unite the tribes. He wasn't the first king. That was King Saul. But it's King David who has the achievement of bringing the 12 tribes together and creating a center in Jerusalem, also called Ir HaDavid, the city of David. So he has that achievement. But his life is of struggle. He comes into history in the book of Samuel with taking on the Philistines, with Goliath. And that success will not end the struggles against the Philistines. He will have the challenges of neighboring nations as well that he will fight with throughout his career. And he will even have his own son, as we saw in one of those early Psalms, Psalm 3, Absalom, chasing him. His is a life of conflict. And the book of Samuel will say that Solomon is told, you will build my temple because your father has been a warrior with blood, and my temple will be a place of peace. So pulling that back, these early Psalms, like the one we're going to examine more closely now, Psalm 11, is about conflict. It's the name of David. He is the one who both struggles with enemies, but also is the Psalter for God. He's the one who always has God as his saving support. So now these 7 verses, it's for the conductor, for David, and it begins with, in Adonai I sheltered. So the preface, the prefix is be, in. There's a sense of God being this source of safety, and he dwells, ba Adonai chasiti, I have found shelter in Yud He Vav He. Ech tamru la nafshi, how will you say to my soul? And again, what's distinctive now about this psalm is here he is talking to what seems to be his neighbors, which is why I called this neighborly doubts. And that is distinctive to the other psalms. In the other,
I'll be done at 10:30.
1 second, we have somebody who needs to get muted, Eric. So what's distinctive about this psalm is he's responding to his neighbors. And I, again, free associate to that first psalm, which in many ways foreshadows what's to come, where there's the warning of not to be in the counsel of the wicked, and the sense that your neighbors will influence you. Beware of the neighbors who are the naysayers. And so here are the neighbors who seem to be in a difficult situation, as and no to do harchem tzipur. How can you say to my soul? Now this is what he's now saying to them in response. How can you, my neighbors, speak to my soul, which can be to my person, to my essence, to my life? No do harchem tzipur. And the word no dead literally means to wander. But in this context, because birds fly, most often it's translated as fly off to the hills or fly off to your mountain like a bird. And verses 2 and 3 seem to be the reason that the neighbors are saying, flee, get out of the city, go to the mountains. For behold, the wicked bend back the bow. They fix the arrow to the bowstring to shoot from the shadows at the upright of heart. So there's danger. They are violent. And there's this image which will reoccur, we'll see, of shadows. In Hebrew, the word here is ophel. Some translate as darkness, fog, shadows. Those who are the enemies are lurking where they're not easily seen, with darkness, which will be contrasted with the ability to see God and light. And the last verse, verse 3, for the foundations are destroyed. What can a righteous person do? So this is his neighbors speaking, it seems. And they define themselves as righteous. They even may believe in God. But there's an enemy that threatens. And therefore, now perhaps is the time to run, to hide. Here in verse 1, he's finding shelter in God. The neighbors are saying, find shelter where you won't be seen. And verse 4 is the pivot. It's not clear if the first half is the continuation of the quote or not. Here's why. Adonai is in the holy palace. Adonai's throne is in heaven. which might be back to the description of the evil that we spoke of yesterday with Psalm 10. They're saying God is removed. God is not here. God is only up there. That's why we got to take care of ourselves. And then, because this is smack in the middle of this psalm, you can divide that middle verse. Eyes behold, referring now joined her. No, eyes behold, pupils probing humanity. And I'll add that I translate this as pupils, as does the Art Scroll edition, but afapav technically is eyelids, and some have commented that they're fluttering like a bird's wings. Some just see afapav as a synonym for eye, but here, eyes behold, pupils probing humanity. And now comes the shift. And now I'm going to shift for a moment. I was reading an article this morning about the governor of Kentucky, who, in contrast to his neighbors like in Tennessee, was among the first to do a shutdown for the state. And the state has fared much better with COVID-19. And in his daily briefings, this young Democratic governor of Kentucky always begins with the same line: we will get through this. Now, his saying, we will get through this, is a statement based on two things. One, humanity is always, there's a history, and the plagues of the past have passed. And the second is it's a matter of faith, because this is a novel threat, and it's not clear how long it will last and what it will take to get through. But he starts his press conferences in Kentucky every day with, we will get through this. And that's the same message for this psalmster. He's speaking to an audience. Here, he's responding to his neighbors, and as if he's speaking to his neighbors, but he's also speaking to himself. And the message is that second half of verse 4. Eyes behold, pupils probing humanity. And I'll continue, and then I'll show you how these words get repeated to artfully weave this psalm. Adonai probes the righteous, the same word used a moment ago in verse 4, which is yivchan. In verse 4, yivchanu. Here, Adonai tzaddik yivchan. Adonai probes, sees the righteous. But the wicked lover of violence, such a soul is hated. Upon the wicked coals will rain fire and brimstone, and burning wind shall be the portion of their cup. Now this verse 6 about fire and brimstone coming from heaven, that's a rejoinder to verse 2. The enemies have arrows they're prepared to shoot, but instead what will happen, what will fly, will be God's punishment of fire and brimstone. And this phrase, yamter eshet v'gafrit, which is will rain fire and brimstone, translated by some as sulfurous fire, is the same words used in Genesis 19:24, in which God, himtir, in which God causes like rain, al Sodom ve'al Amorah, on Sodom and Amorah, gafrit ve'esh, fire and brimstone, me'et Adonai mina shamayim, from God, from the heavens. And my sense is here, there's a remembrance of the past that says we will get through this. The remembrance of the past is that God punished the people in Sodom and Amorah. Those who threaten us today, God is watching. God will respond. And then the last line, for righteousness is Adonai, loving righteousness. And that's the key motif throughout the Psalms, is that righteousness matters to God, that God sees. And the reward, the upright, the yashar, which can either be the upright or the straightforward, particularly with Psalm 10 at the back of our mind since we read it yesterday. The evil are always cunning, deceptive, but the righteous are yashar. They are straightforward, upright. They will see yechazu, that same word that appeared in verse 4 in regard to God. And in verse 4, it was God's eyes behold. Here, the righteous shall behold. Panemo, his face. Some also translate it as God will see their face, the righteous, the face of the righteous. But most, and it seems to me to be more of a destination, to say that the reward of the righteous is they will see God's face. So there's this image throughout. And now I'll just spend a few minutes in terms of the weave, the tapestry, the use of words. The key motif here is that the wicked are lurking in the shadows. They believe that God doesn't see because God's too far away. But indeed, God sees, and the retribution is what they sought to do. So they sought to shoot arrows. God will rain down fire and brimstone. And the reward will be the ability to see God's face, to see that light. Now, the artistry. Verse 1 is the repetition of words. It's amazing how many of the words in this very short psalm are repeated. The name Yud-He Vav-He, God's intimate name, 5 times. The word Tzedek, the word Sadiq, 3 times, and a variation once. The word Nefesh for soul is verses 1 and 5. Verses 2, 3, and 7 begin with the word ki. Here I translate as for, because, or for. The yashar, the straight one, the upright one, verses 2 and 7, again, framing. With rishaim, verses 2, 5, and 6. Yechazu, they will see, verses 4 and 7. Yivchan, they will be probed, verses 4 and 5. And so if you add up those repetition of words, what emerges is that the key motif is that Yud-He Vav-He, God, has a relationship with its Sadiq, and that there will be Yechazu and Yivchan, a seeing and an accounting before God. So to pull this together, a short psalm with a common motif. The common motif is there are the wicked and the righteous in struggle, and God favors the righteous. What's distinctive about this psalm is that the Psalter is addressing his neighbors who are doubting, who are saying God is far away and the enemy is close, the enemy lurking in the shadow. And the response is that of faith. Remember the past and Sodom and Gomorrah when God punished our wicked neighbors or those who were wicked. God does judge, and we will get through this. With that, I feel good that I've stayed on time within the 20 minutes. Easier to do. If I have a moment at the end, I'll read this in Hebrew because it's short, and that's another piece of Psalms. It's a song as well as a poem. It's a song with rhythm and some rhyme that comes through when you hear the Hebrew. But let's take a few minutes to see any of the reactions that you might have in hearing and looking closely at Psalm 11, Neighborly Doubts. If you can take, it will take away the, so I can see everybody. Eric, take away the text. All right.
Okay, I've got just a simple
Okay.
kind of
Carl
low,
and Carl and then Ed Sussman. Go ahead, Carl.
kind of a simple, low-level interpretation of the people who are saying, I've got it open on another screen, about saying, basically the impression I got is they're saying, well, we could do anything we want. We're evil, we could do anything we want because God is up away in his temple on the mountain. I think those people could be thinking of God as, they're not Jewish, they're thinking of God as like a Zeus in a Greek temple. And that's where, when they worship idols, they're only in their temples. We have to go to them in their temples because their gods are not everywhere like our God is.
So I'll just build on your insight, Carl, and that is in the ancient world, that which was holy was a mountain, often where there would be identified with God's presence. So Zeus at the top of the mountain, the God who was removed from the daily happenings on earth. And so when he says, your neighbors say, fly off to the hills like a bird, that's one piece, but Adonai is in the holy palace. Adonai's throne is in heaven. So that's why part 4 seems to be the end of the quote. God's not watching, he's too far away. And what the Psalter is saying, that's not the God I worship. The God I worship, yes, has a palace, has a throne high above, but is integrally aware and watching the morality in this world. Ed, one thought in that regard, how old are Psalms? I'll just pause to say they're at least 2,500 years old to 3,000. Again, King David's about 3,000. Already in the time of the temple, they were chanting the Psalms. Ed Sussman.
One thing that struck me, and it was also tied into yesterday, when we asked in verse 3, what can a righteous person do?
Yeah.
My perception of this is when a righteous person doesn't do anything, he's giving credibility or allowing evil or a wicked person to go on. We have a choice to make in this decision, and this, I think, is very prevalent today. Sometimes we see things and we know what's right, but when we don't do anything, then that gives the wicked person an opportunity to go further.
Well said. So actually the one verse I didn't give attention to that deserved attention is where you're putting your finger, and I greatly appreciate the relevance of this statement. What can a righteous person do? And that can be read as a shrug of the shoulders, meaning nothing, so therefore flee to the mountains, as the end of the neighbor's quote. But the first half of that only adds to the weight of that insight, and that is, for the foundations are destroyed. So what the neighbors are saying is, these aren't normal times. The very foundations of civility or the very foundations of health are destroyed. So, what can I do? Even if I'm righteous, I have no power. And clearly, the second half of the psalm is saying you have to operate knowing that the foundations are in place, meaning God is ultimately the foundation, the right and wrong determiner seeking righteousness, and you still are accountable, and more, your reward is doing the right thing. So one way you can understand the final verse of, for the upright shall behold the divine countenance, is if you do what's right, your reward is knowing that you are acting uprightly. And you can see it clearly, that that's what's demanded of you. But to pull this back, the focus on verse 3 that you put your finger on, Ed, still resonates. What can a righteous person do? What's distinctive about this psalm is these aren't the evil enemies. These are the enemies who say, I'm a good person, but what can I do? That he's responding to. Thank you. One last comment, and then I'm going to read it in Hebrew to pull it together, and then we'll let Carl and others do Kaddish.
Rabbi?
Yes, Alex.
Alex.
It's my reading is that these are his military advisors, and they're saying retreat. And he's saying, well, first it's First, it's useless. They've got their archers around. They'll shoot us anyway.
Yeah.
And his advisors say, look, the walls are undermined. The
Yeah.
foundation of the walls are undermined. What can you do?
Mm.
And he's replying, well, okay, the foundations, the walls are undermined, but God's in the holy palace. God's throne is in heaven, and he's watching over. So this seems to be like Stalin deciding whether or not to flee Moscow.
Mm.
You know?
Yeah. So it's a strategic issue. And that could well be. Interestingly, in the classic commentators, Alex, there's some speculation as to what this moment is, because again, they try to put this into the life of David. And I like your suggestion, which frankly I haven't seen in the commentators, but is as possible, which is one reason that they're calling themselves righteous is, again, they're not the other. These are David's inner circle, his military advisors saying, right now our foundations have been destroyed. We need, what can we do? Now's the time to retreat. And David responding, God will protect us. So that's one possibility. One, and it's always the tension in reading a psalm, particularly a psalm dedicated to David, is that there is an immediate historical moment. And in this case, that it could be a military threat, or that it's broader than that in terms of speaking not just to his military advisors, but speaking to those in his community, not necessarily King David, but somebody like King David, saying, now is not a time to retreat from our core values, but to believe that God will make a distinction between good and bad. And those who are the yashar, those who are the upright, will be protected by God. That's the opening, right? Ba Adonai chasiti, in Adonai I sheltered. So he's feeling safe, but that may be physically safe, or it may be safe because his values are aligned with doing what's right. So that's a tension, and a healthy tension, because that's the nature of the poet and the poetry, is there's a tension between, is this a historic moment, or is this any moment? Is this dealing with a physical threat, or is this dealing with a moral, spiritual alignment? Is this about the darkness of lacking clarity of right and wrong, counterbalanced by the light of God giving direction? So that's the tension that makes this poetry. It's different than prose. You can have more than one possible meaning. And as I come back to that, verse 4, that's another classic poetic quality. You don't know if 4a is part of the quote or is the pivot. And that's at the center of this. Alex, did you want to add? No? So let me do one last thing, and I keep one eye on the clock. I just want to read it because it's short in Hebrew for you to feel the musicality of it. And then we'll have Carl and others conclude with Kaddish. Limenatseach leDavid, ba'Adonai chasiti, ech tomru lenafshi, nodu harchem tzipur, ki hine harshaim yidrechun keshet, konenu chitzam al yeter lirot b'mo ofel liyishrei lev, ki hashatot yaharesun, Sadiq mapa'al, Adonai beheichal kodsho, Adonai b'shemayim kis'o, Einav yechezu, Afapav yevachanu, b'nei Adam. Adonai tzadik yivchan, V'rasha v'ohev chamas sana nafsho, Yamter al rashaim pachim, Eish v'kafrit v'ruach zilafot, Menat kosam, Ki tzadik Adonai, tzedakot ahev, yashar yechezu fanemo. Carl? Kaddish, and others who would wish to say to conclude our study for today. Yitkadal, Yitkadosh, Shemei Rabbah,
Amen.
Bialma, Rach Birute, Biamlich Mavute, Bechaye Chon, Ubiome Chon, Uchaye Dekol Beit Yisrael, Ba'agala, Ubizman Kari, Bi'imru Amen.
Amen. Are you there now? Or?
V'yishtabach, v'pa'ar,
Okay,
v'tomam,
let me give you something to
v'naseh,
for.
v'taleh, v'talal, shemei,
I'll be right
v'kusha,
there.
min kol birchata, v'shirata, tushbechata, v'nechamata, da'amiran yoma Hebrew. Amen.
Amen.
Yehi Shlama, Rabba, Min Shemaya, V'chayim Aleinu, V'yokol Yisrael, V'imru Amen.
Amen.
Yehi Shalom B'romav, U'yaseh Shalom, Aleinu V'yokol Yisrael, B'chol Yoshvei Tevel, V'imru Amen.
Amen.
Thank you all for coming together. Know that this evening there is prayer song with Amy Robinson Katz. For those, it's a wonderful opportunity to hear often a psalm chanted. Friday night, I will be with Carl Cedar leading services at 6 o'clock, with Amy this Shabbat at 10 o'clock. Thank you all.